Hi again, this is Andy Evans, part 8 of how to make a guitar in your garage or at home or wherever you like. Okay, so on the last podcast I was talking about making necks and neck templates. So really the first thing you need before you make a neck is a template. I'm just going to give you some rough dimensions of a template that can fit, that you can use for many different guitars. You can use it for all different scale lengths. So I'm just going to give you some rough dimensions. What you want ideally is a template that is 68 centimeters long in total, which is what that is, 68 centimeters long in total. If you measure from the end of it 49 centimeters, that's where your nut's going to be, roughly, a rough estimate. How about here? So that's 49 centimeters, your nut is there. This is 58 mil wide by 43. Most Gibsons are sort of 43, 44. Sometimes Strats are a bit less. So if you want to make one template that does it all, basically, I would suggest your measurements here are go for 45 mil, and here 59 mil. You can always sand this down afterwards, you know. And if you do an average length from the end of the template to the nut of 50 centimeters, that way you can cover Fender, Strat scales, Les Paul, Gibson long, and I think you can get a Paul Reed Smith on there as well. Because I put an extra millimeter on here, if you need to cut a bit off the end at the end, it's okay, you know, you can trim it down with a sander at the end. The headstock design is up to you. It's quite difficult designing a headstock. On my guitars, I'm going for straight string pull, you know, so the strings are going straight to the tuners with no angle. They're not going off at a strange angle. Sometimes when they go off at a strange angle, it can affect your tuning. Also, the angle where the strings go over the nuts is important. You don't want it too steep, because if you drop the guitar, it can very easily break here. Also, you'll have problems with the tuning stability. So this is what's this? This is 8mm plywood. It's just what I had lying around. I normally make them thicker if I can. If I have you know, thicker MDF or plywood, I'll make them a bit thicker. So once you've got your template and you've decided what scale length you're doing, draw around it, which I've already done on this 22mm thick mahogany. I cut this out earlier on the table saw. I cleaned up one side with a hand plane, made one side square, and then I cut it from a 55mm piece of rough cut timber that I had, and out of that I can make two necks, you know. So what I'm going to do after I've cut this out, the shape of the neck, I'm going to do a scarf joint on the back of the neck. So basically what a scarf joint is when I'm going to cut this away at an angle, and the piece, if you can imagine that, like that, cut away, the piece that comes off the top will go onto the bottom, be glued onto the bottom. It's a cheap way of doing, you know, sloping back headstocks. It's a very quick way of doing it. You can also use 20mm wood. Once it's got a fingerboard on, this will be the right thickness. And it's also very strong as well. It's a lot stronger. A scarf joint on the back is a lot stronger than just using, I mean, for instance, Gibson use 2-inch wood and they cut, and the neck will be cut like that, and then you put two sides on here. But you waste a lot of wood. You're using a 2-inch piece, 50mm piece, and then you cut it like this to your angle here. This piece is waste at the back, This way, the way I'm doing it, you can get 2 necks out of the same piece of wood, and it's stronger as well. Okay, so what you do, you put this, you template onto your piece of wood like this. Draw around it. Decide on what sort of headstock you're going to have. I made a new shape earlier. It's a very short, little stubby little headstock really. I've made a pattern somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where it is. So I'm going to go for that. So the next stage is to cut that out of the bandsaw. When you use a bandsaw, you probably, before you use a bandsaw, you're probably better going onto Google and Wikipedia and googling safe ways to use one, because if daydreaming for a few seconds, you can cut a finger off quite easily. So I always keep my fingers well away. I go clockwise normally. The main thing to be aware of on bandsaws is when you start cutting tight curves, sometimes the blade can snap or it can jam up. So you have to be very careful on your curves, do it slowly, or sometimes cut across the grain like this. I'll do this a bit closer so you can see. On a tight curve, cut this way, and then cut that way. Normally something like that would be okay. It's when you're doing the horns of a guitar inside here that can be quite difficult with a bandsaw. Normally I would cut straight lines like this, here, 3 or 4, and then I would cut and piece by piece cut it out, and that's the way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to plug the bandsaw on, start cutting, and it shouldn't take me too long. If you want to turn your sound down, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so I've started cutting that. You can see what I'm doing there. I've not done it fully. I'm not going to, bore you with cutting through this for 5 minutes. Okay, so once that's cut out, the next stage is to get the belt sander, the vertical belt sander, as I said in the earlier podcast. I'll just get the belt sander so you know. Belt sander. I made like a piece of wood that fits under here, and a piece of wood here, which is like a guide. So you screw your template back onto your wood once it's cut out, and then you clean it up like this, all around the edges. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'll do that on my next podcast. This should be nice and clean. I should be able to route a truss rod channel on the next podcast. Truss rods, it's very important to have a truss rod. I'll just explain briefly what a truss rod is. It's a steel bar in a slot basically. This is very exaggerated, but in a steel slot like this. The reason you have this is because when the tension of the strings pulls the guitar neck forward like this, and the bar that's like this threaded bar on the end. It's anchored here. When you tighten it up at one end, it wants to straighten or it wants to shorten, and that pushes the inner of the neck forward. So this counteracts the tension of the strings. So a truss rod is very important. I have a jig for doing truss rods that I've made myself, a little template, and I'll clean all this up first, cut it out, clean it all up, and then the next podcast I'll show you my jig, and we'll route out the truss rod hole. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.